Hello, I hope your week is going well. In the online lecture PowerPoint, you learned how to do a frequency table by hand. In the video today, I'm going to show you how to do a frequency table using Microsoft Excel. And we'll start off with the standard frequency table. The computers on campus and also my office are PCs. So if you're using a Mac, the steps I show you may be a little bit different. If so, I recommend that you find a PC to practice on. When it comes to the exams, the face-to-face proctors are likely to have PCs as well. You will want to check the types of computers that those proctors will have you use once you have scheduled your exam. Doing or application is better than listening to me. You're going to learn a lot more that way. So you'll need to replicate what I show you in this video and submit your spreadsheet at the end of this lecture. You will find two files below. One is a data spreadsheet and the other is a step-by-step directions document on how to make a standard frequency table in Excel. To show you how to create a standard frequency table, I will share my screen so you can see the steps that I use. I will also go back and forth between the spreadsheet as well as the Word document that has the directions on it. All right, so I've opened up both the spreadsheet and the document. You can see here that I'm sharing the screen between them so I can go back and forth fairly easily. I recommend that you do the same both for assignments and also for exams. Whenever you're working with a spreadsheet, you do want to take a look at the columns in the rows. They tell you something about the data that you have. So in Excel, each row is a different participant, or what we call an observation. So remember, observation can be people, they can be things. In this case, they're going to be people. And then again, each column is a variable. So here we have a column for the participant ID number. So each ID number represents a different person, so it varies, it's a variable. And then in column B, we have a particular question that was asked of students in a previous semester. And so you'll see that those values change, they differ depending on who gives the responses, and so it also varies, it is also a variable. Now on every Excel spreadsheet, you're going to notice that at the bottom there's a tab down here that says Codebook. If you look at that Codebook tab, you will see that your variables are given more detail. So here are the labels, and you'll see again PIDs, participant identification number. In this case, individuality was a question that was asked students. The statement for that question was, clothes are one of the most important ways I have expressing my individuality. If we want to see how people responded, we can hover over the label. You'll see that a comment box will open up, and it'll tell you as far as what each value represents us in the data. So 1 equals strongly disagree, 7 equals strongly agree. If we go back to the data tab, you'll see in that label that that comment box is there as well, so that you can see that this particular participant, participant number 4, reported a 7, and a 7 in this case represents a strongly agree to the statement, clothes are one of the most important ways I have of expressing my individuality. So that's the basics of the spreadsheet. Now let's go ahead and get into creating our standard frequency table. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go over to the Word document. You'll notice at the very top of this Word document, it says types of frequency tables. And there's two different types. You learned about this in the online lecture. There's the standard frequency table, that's in units. And then there's the group frequency table, which is in terms of intervals or ranges of values. Now, when we use each of these will depend on the type of values that you have in your data set. So if we're going to use a standard frequency table, typically we're going to have less than 10 different values of equal width. If we were to use a group frequency table, we have a lot of different values that span a very wide range, usually more than 10 different values of equal width. So if we go and we look at the data that we have here, we see that our values in this case range from 1 to 7. And the values of 1 to 7 are equal widths, and it's less than 10. So here it makes sense that a standard frequency table is what we'd want to create. Now, if we had values between, let's say, 1 and 150, then that would definitely be more than 10 different values of equal width, and we'd want to group them into an interval frequency table. In this case, we'll use a standard frequency table. If you go back over to your Word document, you'll see the steps to creating a frequency table, a standard frequency table. Very first step, step 1 is open your Excel. We've already done that. Step 2 is we're going to insert a pivot table. So we're going to go to our Excel spreadsheet. We're going to click on the tab that says Insert. Then we're going to click on Pivot Table. And once we open that up, a dialog box will appear where we will select the column of data that we want to use. And we're going to indicate where we want to put the table. And once we do that, we'll click OK. All right, so let's go over to that spreadsheet. Let's go ahead and walk through that. So we're going to go up here to Insert. And then we're going to click on Pivot Tables all the way to the left of your screen. Once we click on Pivot Table, you will see that a dialog box appears. And in that very first box, you'll see the select a table or range of data. In this case, all we want is the data in column B. And so I'm going to click on column B. So just right there on the B, and it's going to highlight all the values, including the label that's in that particular column. Once I do that, I need to indicate where I want to put this. I can put it in a new worksheet if I like, or I can put it in the existing worksheet or spreadsheet. In this case, I want to put it in the existing spreadsheet, and I can indicate a location. And so I can put it in this first sheet that I'm in here, the data tab sheet, or I can go down to the Codebook one. But because my data is right here, I'm actually just going to keep it in this worksheet on this tab for the data tab. I do want to give myself a few columns, so don't put it right next to your data. That's important if you ever need to sort your data or filter your data in some way. And so I'm just going to place it someplace over here. And so it looks like it's going to be column G, row 3, and that's where we're going to start our table. Then once you do that, you go ahead and click OK. So once you click OK, you'll see that a pivot table fields box opens up here to the right. We're going to use that in the very next step. So let's go ahead and go back to our Word document. All right, so here we're at step 3. So on the right screen of your screen, again, we see that pivot table fields list. So we want to click the box in front of the variable that we want to create our table with. We're going to drag that variable name into the sum of values box at the very bottom of that field. We're going to do this twice to create 3 columns. Back in the Excel spreadsheet, you'll see that our variable is listed here in our pivot table fields. Now there's only the individuality variable because we only selected column B. If we selected column A in B, we would have 2 variables there, PID and individuality. But we're only interested in individuality, so that's all we selected. I'm going to go ahead and check that box. You notice that once I do that, that variable is going to show up in the sum of values box down here. Typically, the default is it'll show up in the rows box. If that's the case, then you have one less step. Here, it shows up in our sum of values. So we're just going to drag that down one more time. We want 2 of these in the sum of values box. And then we want 1 in the rows box. So if yours doesn't automatically give you the rows box, go ahead and drag it down. Make sure that it's there. Ultimately, what you need is your variable in the rows box and your variable twice in the sum of values box. Let's go back to our Word document. So now we're on step 4. So we should have our 3 columns now. Now what we want to do is we want to right-click on the title of the second column. We want to summarize those values by counts because we want frequencies, and if we get counts, it'll tell us how many times each of those values show up in our data set. We then want to right-click on the third column and show values as % of grand total. Now before we do that, we want to make sure that that column is showing as a count and not a sum, so we'll have to double check that as well. Let's go back to our spreadsheet, and let's look at that second column. So we're just going to click on the header, we're going to right-click on it, and we want to summarize our values by counts and not sums. So notice that sum is checked, we want it to be counts. And when we do that, it's going to change it from sum of individuality to count of individuality. Now, if your second column doesn't automatically do that as well, sometimes it will, then you want to make sure that you change it to count also. So here we have sum of individuality or sum of our variable. We want to change that so it's summarized by count. Okay, so once we have it in a count, we can then show values as the % of grand total, and that's going to be our frequency % column. So now we have each of our values in our data set, 2 through 7. We have the count or the frequency of each of those values, and we have the percent of each of those counts or frequencies. Let's go back to our Word document. We are now on step 5, so we're going to rename each of our columns. So here we have a standard frequency table, so we're going to relabel that very first column as score. If we had a group frequency table, we would relabel it as interval or intervals. The second column we're going to call frequency, that's our frequency count, and that third column is our frequency percent. And then the last thing we'll need to do is that we will need to add a title for the table and remove that very last row with the blank in it. So that very last row is not adding information to our table. It's actually distracting or detracting from our table, so we're going to get rid of it. Now note here that if you're creating a group frequency table, then you would want to relabel each of your columns and then move directly to step 6. If you do the rest of step 5 here, you'll have to undo it for that group frequency table. Obviously, in this case, we're doing a standard frequency table, so we are going to do this last portion of step 5. So back in our spreadsheet, we're going to relabel each of the columns. So here we're going to say score. The next column, we're going to type in frequency. And again, all I'm doing is clicking on the title, so left click. And then this last one we're going to call percentage. So we still need to get rid of that very last row. So if you're looking at your directions, to do that, we're going to highlight that interval. So we're going to click on that interval that says blank. We're going to click on filter, and we're going to click on hide selected. So again, we'll right click on blank. We'll go to filter, and we're going to click on hide selected items, and it's going to get rid of that entire row. Now when it gets rid of that row, it's going to reshape your table, and that's okay. If you wanted to reformat your columns, the width of those columns, you can do that if you hover between your two columns. So here between G and H, we get this line with 2 arrows on it. We can bring in that row if we like, or we can make it wider if we like as well. And we're just going to do that by left clicking and holding. And so I'll change it to the size that I want. All right, and so there is my standard frequency table. So the very last thing that we have to do is to give it a title. The title should be reflective of what the viewer is going to see in that table. So I'm just going to click on the cell right above the table, and I'm going to type in standard frequency table. Of students perceived importance of close on individuality. And that's it. There's our title. That is our standard frequency table. Please remember to save your spreadsheet with your name as the file name and submit below in the submit file question. Thank you.